Hey guys, tonight we're settling between two rivers where the ground is damp with history itself. You step into a landscape unlike any other flat plains, shimmering with heat, yet veined with water from the Tigris and the Euphrates. These rivers don't just flow, they cradle, they flood, they nourish, they frustrate, and they sustain. And here, in this wedge of fertile soil, humanity's first true cities begin to stir. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, share in the comments where you're rewatching from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing our sleepy map light up across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge along a dusty path in southern Mesopotamia around 3500 BCE, where scattered villages have begun to fuse into something new. Smut brick huts cluster together, then sprout communal walls, then stretch into sprawling towns. You hear the bleating of sheep herded into pens, the splash of irrigation ditches channeling river water into parched soil. Barley fields shimmer under the sun like dull bronze, and date palms stand in neat lines. It's a mainstream fact. This region, later called the cradle of civilization, birthed the world's first urban centers, Rook. Your Eridu places where populations reached tens of thousands at a time when most of humanity still lived in small farming hamlets. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamia was uniquely suited for this leap, or whether similar conditions existed elsewhere but left fewer traces. Quirky tidbit: archaeologists found that some of the earliest city walls were so thick they could have stopped elephants. Yet, they were built centuries before anyone in Mesopotamia had even seen an elephant. Perhaps overkill, or perhaps ambition baked into bricks. You step into Uruk, a place that by 3000 BCE may have held more than 40,000 souls. Streets twist between mud brick houses, workshops clanged with metal tools, temples rise like staircases for the gods. The smell is a stew of bread ovens, tanned leather, animal dung, and incense drifting from shrines. Everyone seems to be busy, yet everyone's labor ties together. Farmers send grain, potters make jars to hold it, scribes scratch accounts on clay, priests demand offerings. Joke 1. City life is booming, but plumbing isn't. You'd better watch your step on those alleys. The rivers are both blessing and curse. Each spring, snow melt from distant mountains swells the Tigris and Euphrates, flooding fields and leaving silt rich enough to grow bumper crops. But floods also sweep away homes and drown livestock. Managing water becomes the obsession of these first cities. Canals snake through fields, dikes line the banks, and entire communities gather with shovels and baskets to dig, patch, and redirect. Historians still argue whether this collective need for irrigation birthed organized government. Maybe kings rose not from thrones, but from ditch-digging supervisors, ruled by whoever kept the barley dry. Quirky note: ancient records mention barley beer as a staple diet, thick and cloudy, drunk through reed straws from large communal jars. Imagine leaning into a pot with 10 other farmers after a hot day of digging canals. First happy hour in history. You look around and see how fast humanity is changing. In just a few centuries, people move from scattered huts to streets, temples, workshops, palaces. The scale itself is dizzying. No one has ever lived like this before. There's pride, there's chaos, and there's a sense that people are improvising civilization day by day. Joke 2. No city zoning laws. Here you might get a goat pen next to a temple bakery. And yet, beneath the dust, something monumental is forming. These rivers aren't just watering fields, they're watering imagination. The first experiments with law, trade, architecture, and myth are flowing into the world from here. The blueprint of cities, both their beauty and their mess, begins in Mesopotamia. Joke 3. You realize as you drift through the alleys that while humanity invented civilization here, they definitely didn't invent a noise ordinance. The rivers gurgle, the barley rustles, the walls of Uruk glow in the sunset. And here, in this wedge of earth, the first cities breathe into being, setting the stage for everything that follows. You step deeper into the heart of the city, where mud brick rises, not just into homes, but into monuments. The air smells of baked clay and burning reeds, and the skyline bristles with massive stair-stepped towers. These are the ziggurats temples that climb into the desert sky, one layer stacked upon another like a colossal wedding cake for the gods. Mainstream fact: ziggurats served as temple complexes in Sumerian and later Mesopotamian cities, with famous examples at Ur and Uruk. They weren't tombs like the pyramids of Egypt. Instead, they were platforms meant to bring worshippers closer to the heavens. Historians still argue whether ordinary citizens were ever allowed inside their sanctuaries or if access was reserved for priests alone. Quirky tidbit: the Sumerians often baked little clay figurines and buried them at the foundation of ziggurats as construction offerings. Okay, imagine breaking ground on a skyscraper today and first tossing in a handful of action figures for luck. Hey, you wandered the courtyard of Uruk's white temple, its walls gleaming in sunlight. Priests bustle about in linen robes, tending fires, burning incense, chanting hymns. Each brick was molded by hand, thousands upon thousands, sun-dried in fields and stacked by laborers whose sweat stains are invisible but still imagined. You feel the vibration of drums. Festivals draw crowds. Here citizens pour in with offerings of barley, sheep, or jars of beer. In return, they seek favor: a good harvest, protection from floods, mercy from disease. Joke 1. Think of it as the first customer loyalty program, except the rewards points are divine blessings. The ziggurat dominates the horizon. From the top, priests observe the stars, watch storms roll in, and claim to interpret the moods of gods. At night, torches burn along its steps, visible for miles. For people living in mud brick houses, the sight must have been both comforting and intimidating, a daily reminder of divine authority looming overhead. Historians still argue whether ziggurats doubled as administrative hub centers, not just of worship, but of taxation and record keeping. Some archaeologists suggest that they held granaries, treasuries, even classrooms for training scribes. In Mesopotamia, religion and government were never far apart. Often they were the same stairway climbing into the sky. It's a quirky note. Later, Mesopotamian traditions inspired legends like the Tower of Babel, said to be modeled on massive ziggurats in Babylon. The idea of humans stacking their way to heaven left a cultural footprint that still lingers in myth and scripture. You trace your fingers across a brick stamped with a king's name. Every ruler who commissioned construction wanted immortality through clay. Their names, pressed into bricks, whisper across millennia: I built this. I reached for the gods. Joke 2. It's history's earliest form of graffiti X. Instead of spray paint, it's baked into the real estate. Festivals here must have been overwhelming. Processions with statues of deities carried on litters, musicians blowing long silver trumpets, dancers circling in trance. Children would have watched wide-eyed, clutching dates or figs from vendors, learning from the spectacle what power and divinity looked like. And when the crowd left, the temple remained. Silent, monumental, its staircases crawling with shadows. The ziggurat was both stage and mountain, both bureaucracy and altar. It told the people of Mesopotamia that the divine wasn't far above. It had an address in the center of town. Joke 3 drifts in with the wind over baked clay. These towers weren't T skyscrapers with office space. They were skyscrapers with God space. As night falls, torches flicker along the ziggurat's edges. The stars wheel overhead, priests murmur prayers, and the city sleeps in the shadow of steps leading upward. Always upward, to gods who never climb down. You drift into a dim chamber lined with shelves of clay. The air smells like earth after rain, though it hasn't rained. That scent comes from thousands of tablets stacked neatly, each one marked with tiny, wedge-shaped impressions. Keen. This is where the first writing in history takes form. Cuneiform. Mainstream fact. Around 3200 BCE, Sumerians developed the earliest known writing system. They pressed reed styluses into wet clay, creating wedge-like marks. Cuneus in Latin means wedge. At first, these signs recorded numbers and trade tallies, but soon they expanded to capture myths, prayers, contracts, and laws. Historians still argue whether writing emerged primarily for commerce or for religion, with both leaving equally heavy fingerprints. Quirky tidbit. The earliest word problem we've found is a scribbled tablet that records beer rations for workers. Imagine the first office memo in human history being about how much beer you get paid. You sit beside a young scribe. He dips a reed stylus into his hand, presses deliberate marks into clay. Each line is quick, almost casual, yet loaded with meaning. He's not writing poetry, He's tracking barley deliveries from one farmer to another. Bureaucracy, not inspiration, gives birth to writing. Joke 1. Forget romantic novels. Humanity's first bestseller was essentially a receipt. Still, once invented, the script refuses to stay in ledgers. Priests adapt it for hymns, kings for decrees, scholars for recording omens. Soon, whole stories unspooled in these symbols. In dusty corners, myths are written down, turning campfire tales into immortal text. And you realize, this is the first time human memory gains a backup drive. Historians still argue whether literacy was widespread or confined to elites. Evidence suggests scribes formed a professional class, trained for years in special schools called Oedipus. Students copied science again and again, filling practice tablets until their hands cramped. Some even etched complaints about their lessons, proof that homework frustration is as old as writing itself. Quirky note. Mistakes were corrected by smoothing clay with a thumb and rewriting a low-tech delete key. In some tablets, you can still see smudged spots where a scribe's correction lingers like a ghost of indecision. In the marketplace, writing transformed trade. Merchants sealed clay tablets inside hollow clay envelopes, stamped with cylinder seals, tiny carved rollers pressed into clay like personal logos. To read the contract, you'd smash the envelope open like a Kinder egg, revealing the terms inside. Joke 2. Imagine smashing open your bank statement every month just to see how broke you are. You glance at shelves where myths are tucked among accounts, fragments of creation stories, hymns to Inanna, laments over floods. For the first time, voices leap across centuries. A prayer pressed into clay in 2000 BCE can still be read today, as if the priest whispered it yesterday. The soundscape here is quiet but alive. The soft scrape of styluses, the occasional sigh of a weary student, the thud of a finished tablet set aside to dry. When fired in kilns or by accident in building fires, tablets became nearly indestructible. That's why we can still read them long after palaces have crumbled. Quirky tidbit. One preserved tablet contains what seems to be the world's oldest known joke, a Sumerian proverb about a woman not farting in her husband's lap. Proof that bathroom humor, too, is as old as civilization. Joke 3. You realize humanity's first library catalog was basically just beer, barley, and bodily functions. As you step out of the chamber, the shelves loom behind you, full of tiny voices trapped in clay. These tablets, dainty, look like much just lumps of dried earth, but they hold the first flicker of permanence in human thought. And in Mesopotamia, permanence matters because floods, wars, and time devour everything else. Writing alone endures. You walk into a bustling city square where voices rise like a swarm of bees. This is no village council, it's the heart of a city-state, one of dozens scattered across Mesopotamia. Each has its own walls, its own ruler, its own patron god. The ground trembles, not just from carts rattling over stone, but from rivalries waiting to ignite. Mainstream fact: Mesopotamia was never one united nation in its early centuries. Instead, it was a patchwork of city-states like Uruk, Ur, Lagash, Kish, and Nippur. Case, they built alliances, signed treaties, and organized wars over water, land, and prestige. Historians still argue whether these rivalries fueled innovation or drained resources that might have gone toward unity. Quirky tidbit: some of the earliest recorded border disputes weren't about whole rivers or mountains, but about irrigation canals. Kings fought not over continents, but over which ditch fed which barley field. Imagine starting a war because your neighbor rerouted a trickle of water. You pass scribes reading proclamations aloud. A king of Uruk has expanded fields. A rival in Lagash has insulted him. A minor god statue was stolen during a raid. Citizens listen, gossip, and grumble. Politics isn't hidden behind palace walls, echoes through the streets. Joke 1. You realize Mesopotamia invented not only government, but also political drama. Thousands of years before social media made it unbearable. City-states rise and fall like reeds in floodwater. One ruler proclaims himself Lugal, big man, lord over many cities. Another is toppled when his canal project fails and crops rot. Armies clash in dusty fields. Soldiers armed with spears, axes, and leather shields. Sometimes victory is total. Other times borders barely shift. Historians still argue whether kingship emerged as divine mandate or as practical organization. Was the ruler chosen by God's or by the sheer need for someone to tell people where to dig canals? In the myths, kings are God sent. In the clay records, kings are also sued, petitioned, and occasionally overthrown. Quirky note: we have inscriptions bragging about washing enemy statues in rivers, a symbolic humiliation. Forget conquering territory. Stealing your rival's idol and dunking it like laundry was a victory statement. You wander into a palace courtyard. Soldiers drill under the watchful eye of commanders. Tribute arrives: barley sacks, sheep, copper, ingots offered to prove loyalty. Inside, a ruler sits on a wooden throne carved with lions, flanked by priests. He claims power, not only by spear, but by divine favor. His city's patron god stands behind him, invisible but undeniable. Joke 2. The original campaign slogan was basically, "Vote for me." The gods already did. Conflict is constant, but so is cooperation. Cities trade grain for timber, wool for metals, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan for dates from southern orchards. Diplomacy is as vital as war. Clay tablets survive with treaties marked by curses, so anyone breaking them would be punished by gods, floods, or worse. Quirky tidbit: one treaty even invoked a curse that frogs would overrun a violator's land. Nothing says "don't cross me" like the threat of amphibian infestation. Through it all, cities grow, burn, and rebuild. Uruk may dominate one century, Lagash the next. Power is as shifting as the rivers that feed them. But out of this chaos emerges structure: bureaucracy, armies, priesthoods, the notion that human life needs leaders even if they're flawed. Joke 3. You can almost hear ancient Mesopotamians muttering. All politicians are the same while waiting for their grain ration. As you leave the square, the shouts of citizens fade into the hum of canals. City-states are fragile, restless, and competitive, but they set the pattern for governance that echoes through time. Borders, rivalries, alliances, and ambition. Mesopotamia isn't one kingdom, yet a crowded neighborhood of rivals, each clawing for the title of first among equals. You drift into the hush of twilight, where lamplight flickers against clay walls and shadows stretch across courtyards. Here, every gust of wind, every streak of lightning, every swollen flood carries divine meaning. To the people of Mesopotamia, gods aren't distant, they're everywhere. They thunder in storms, burn in the sun, shimmer in the stars. Mainstream fact: The Mesopotamians worshipped a vast pantheon with deities like Anu sky, Enlil air, Enki, water and wisdom, and Inanna, love and war. Each city claimed a patron god whose temple anchored civic pride. Historians still argue whether the pantheon reflected natural forces personified, or whether it evolved from older clan totems absorbed into urban life. Quirky tidbit: one prayer tablet to Inanna requests both passionate romance and a safe harvest in the same breath. Proof that multitasking in prayer was as old as writing itself. You wander into a temple courtyard where priests read omens from animal livers. They spread the organ on a clay model marked with sections, tracing veins like maps of fate. Citizens line up, anxious for interpretations. A good omen means festivals, marriages, ventures. A bad omen? Delay, sacrifice, or worse. Joke 1. Imagine making life decisions based not on spreadsheets but on spleens. Festivals blaze with color. At New Year celebrations in Babylon, processions, parades, statues of gods through streets while citizens sing hymns. Priests chant as music swells, drums, lyres, flute saw, echoing between brick walls. For ordinary people, these rituals aren't abstract philosophy, tangible, sensory, full of incense, smoke, and clashing cymbals. Historians still argue whether these public rituals truly united citizens, or were more about reinforcing elite control. Were people celebrating faith or simply being reminded who held the keys to the gods? Quirky note: astrologers charted the sky, believing stars and planets embodied divine will. The placement of Venus or Jupiter could signal prosperity or doom. This fascination with the heavens is why we still call the zodiac signs a legacy of Mesopotamian stargazing. The myths swirl everywhere. You hear of Enki tricking other gods with clever schemes, of Enlil sending floods, of Inanna descending to the underworld and returning reborn. Stories explain everything from harvest cycles to mortality. People don't just tell these tales, they live them, seeing floods as echoes of divine wrath, and harvests as proof of divine favor. Joke 2. It's basically the universe's first customer service system. Storms are complaints. Sunshine is approval. In quiet moments, families offer clay figurines at household shrines. They whisper prayers for protection, safe childbirth, or a good crop yield. Religion isn't just state festivals, it's embedded in daily life, from the smallest hut to the tallest ziggurat. Quirky tidbit: archaeologists have found tiny terracotta demons placed near beds as protective charms. One looks like a squat, line-headed figure whose job was to scare away nightmares. Ancient Mesopotamia, where even your sleep had a security guard. The gods aren't gentle though. Floods can wash away entire fields overnight. Drought can parch canals. Disease can sweep through cities. To Mesopotamians, this instability proves the gods are powerful, capricious, and must be appeased constantly. Historians still argue whether this view of fickle deities reflected the unpredictable rivers themselves, shaping a culture resigned to divine volatility. Joke 3. You realize Mesopotamian religion was less like a comforting bedtime story and more like having dozens of unpredictable bosses who all demand overtime. As night deepens, the ziggurat looms in silhouette, torchlight flickering on its terraces. Priests chant under the stars, and families curl under red mats, whispering prayers into the dark. For them, every dream, every omen, every storm is threaded with divine presence. In Mesopotamia, gods don't live in faraway heavens, they live right outside your window. You find yourself standing before a tall slab of black basalt, its surface polished smooth, carved with neat rows of wedge-shaped marks. At the top, a relief shows King Hammurabi receiving the laws from Shamash, the sun god. The message is clear. These rules aren't just politics, they redefine, will etched into stone. Mainstream fact: Hammurabi, who ruled Babylon around 1792 to 1750 BCE, is most famous for his legal code, one of the earliest surviving examples of written law. Over 280 laws are carved into his stele, covering everything from trade disputes to family matters. Historians still argue whether the code was applied literally in daily life or served more as a symbolic statement of royal authority. Quirky tidbit: one of Hammurabi's laws prescribes that if a builder constructs a house and it collapses, killing the owner, the builder should be put to death. Strict building codes, indeed. Imagine your local contractor sweating bullets over every beam. You read through the carved rules. They speak of property rights, wages, debts, adoption, marriage, even the price of hiring an ox. Justice here is pragmatic, but harsh. Punishments often match crimes with brutal symmetry and eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Joke 1. Mesopotamian lawyers must have had the shortest consultations ever. Did you poke his eye? Yes. Well, guess what's coming? But the code isn't only punishment, okay? It sets out protections for the weak, widows, orphans, debtors, okay? It regulates contracts, ensuring fair weights and measures. In a world of shifting rulers and unpredictable floods, the idea of written, consistent law must have felt like an anchor. Historians still argue whether Hammurabi truly invented these laws or simply compiled older traditions under his name. Branding himself as the great lawgiver, some even suggested the code was more propaganda than practice few citizens ever saw at the stele. But everyone heard the king's claim that justice flowed through him. Quirky note: replicas of Hammurabi's code exist today in museums from Paris to Chicago. Tourists gawk at the tiny wedges, not realizing they're reading the fine print of history's first legal handbook. You imagine how ordinary people must have reacted. A merchant cheats a customer, and suddenly there's not just rumor of punishment, there are family disputes, inheritance, and priests point to Hammurabi's words, not just their own judgment. The presence of law moves justice from private vengeance to public declaration. Joke 2. In modern terms, Hammurabi basically said, check the terms and conditions. Except you couldn't scroll past them. You had to bow to them. The stele also reinforced the bond between kingship and divinity. By carving Shamash into the stone, Hammurabi claimed his authority came not from swords, but from cosmic order. Justice wasn't just his policy, was the god's design. And yet, not all was equal. Laws varied depending on social class. A noble might pay a fine, where a commoner suffered mutilation. Justice was written, but hierarchy was still the ink. Historians still argue whether this inequality weakened the code's fairness or merely reflected the rigid structures of the time. Quirky tidbit: some tablets preserve students practicing Hammurabi's laws in scribal schools, copying punishments line by line. Imagine learning handwriting drills that included, if a son strikes his father, his hand shall be cut off. It's motivation to get your pen strokes right. It's joke 3. You realize Hammurabi's classroom motto wasn't to learn from your mistakes, but avoid them at all costs. As the sun sets, the stele casts a long shadow across Babylon's streets. Merchants close stalls, families gather for meals, disputes simmer down under the weight of those carved wedges. In Mesopotamia, where floods and kings change without warning, Hammurabi's code offers a strange kind of permanence. Justice inscribed in stone, echoing through centuries. You wander into the heart of a Mesopotamian marketplace where dust swirls with voices and the air smells like roasted barley bread. The hum of trade fills every alley, merchants haggling, donkeys braying, and the clatter of copper weights striking stone counters. If the ziggurat was the spiritual center of a city, the market was its pulse. Mainstream fact: Mesopotamian cities thrived on trade, both local and long distance. Farmers brought grain, dates, and wool. Artisans offered pottery, jewelry, and textiles. Merchants carried copper from Oman, timber from Lebanon, and lapis lazuli, all the way from Afghanistan. Historians still argue whether trade was mostly controlled by temple institutions or by private merchants competing for profit. Quirky tidbit: receipts from some clay tablets show that beer was not only a staple food, but a form of payment. Workers might be paid in daily beer rations, their wages measured in sila, about a liter. Imagine payday being less about checks and more about clay jars of frothy brew. You stroll past stalls shaded with woven mats. A farmer yells proudly about the sweetness of his dates. A herder drives sheep through the crowd, their bleats mixing with the ringing of bronze bells on their necks. A woman spreads brightly dyed wool, reds and blues striking against the dusty street. Joke 1. It's basically a shopping mall, just with more goats and fewer escalators. Trade here isn't only about goods, it's about information. Merchants swap news from distant cities, gossip about kings, and rumors of floods upriver. The marketplace is where you hear first that a rival city is arming, or that a caravan has been lost to bandits. Historians still argue whether markets operated with free pricing, or whether temples and palaces enforced standard rates. Clay tablets with price lists suggest both. Some goods tightly regulated, others left to the art of haggling. Quirky note: merchants sealed their deals with cylinder seals rolled across clay contracts. Each seal was a miniature artwork, carved with animals, gods, or family emblems. Some were so intricate that modern jewelers admired them as tiny masterpieces. You duck into a corner where scribes sit at low tables. They jot down tallies of wool sacks or date baskets, recording each transaction with wedge marks. The whir of trade can't run without paperwork even in 2000 BCE. Bureaucracy shadows the market stalls. Joke 2. You realize humanity invented receipts long before customer service hotlines. And what of luxuries? Spices, perfumes, exotic woodsaw flowed through these streets, traded for grain and wool. Mesopotamia lacked natural resources like timber or precious metals. So trade networks stretched astonishingly far, linking the Euphrates to mountains, deserts, and seas. The rivers here are highways, carrying barges piled with goods to distant harbors. Quirky tidbit: one tablet records a loan of silver to be repaid after the caravan returned safely. Even then, insurance was part of commerce. The original, if it gets lost in transit, we'll sort it later policy. The market also reflects social classes. Nobles buy fine fabrics, priests secure offerings for temples, commoners scrounge for cheap fish or onions. Children dart through the crowd clutching sweet cakes, while guards watch from shaded posts to deter thieves. Joke 3. You think Amazon Prime is fast, but these traders managed next-day delivery with donkeys and boats, assuming next day meant next season. As you leave the market, the buzz lingers in your ears. The clatter of copper, the murmur of scribes, the rhythm of barter. Here in the cradle of civilization, trade isn't just economics, it's community, risk, gossip, and survival, all woven together in the dusty breath of the bazaar. You wander into a quiet courtyard where scribes scratch not numbers this time, but equations. And priests climb steps of ziggurats with their eyes fixed not on worshippers, but on the night sky. Mesopotamia is more than markets, and King Sid is also the birthplace of mathematics and astronomy, where patterns of stars and numbers slowly turn chaos into order. Mainstream fact: the Mesopotamians developed a base 60 number system, which is why we still measure time in 60 seconds per minute and circles in 360 degrees. They charted stars, tracked lunar cycles, and devised calendars to predict floods and plantings. Historians still argue whether these systems were designed mainly for agriculture, religion, or bureaucratic record-keeping. Quirky tidbit: clay tablets show multiplication tables, division problems, even quadratic equations, solved thousands of years before algebra had a name. Students at Scrabble schools copied rows of problems like, what is 7 times 9? Proof that homework headaches are ancient. You crouch beside a scribe, bent over his tablet. His reed stylus taps out numbers in neat rows, symbols repeated until muscle memory carries the pattern. He mutters as he works, perhaps calculating the dimensions of a field or the ratio of barley to beer rations. Joke 1. Somewhere in ancient year, a teenager was already complaining, "When will I ever use this in real life?" Meanwhile, priests look skyward. On ziggurat rooftops, they map constellations and track the moon's path. They notice eclipses, align temples with solstices, and record omens from planetary movements. To them, astronomy isn't separate from divination. Stars are the gods' handwriting across the heavens. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamian star charts represent genuine science or religious ritual cloaked in numbers. Yet, the precision is undeniable. Records of eclipses are so exact that modern scientists use them to calibrate ancient calendars. It's a quirky note: the planet Venus fascinated Mesopotamian observers. They tracked its appearance so closely that some of the earliest surviving astronomical diaries are essentially Venus blogs, recording each rise and setting with almost obsessive detail. Mathematics served daily life too. Farmers calculated areas of fields. Architects measured bricks. Merchants tallied trade routes. The base 60 system made fractions easier, allowing for divisions into halves, thirds, and sixths with neat results. That's why we still inherit the awkward but enduring 60-minute hour. Joke 2. Blame Mesopotamia next time you relate. They read the reason you can divide an hour neatly into 10. In schools, children chanted number tables alongside cuneiform signs. Clay fragments survive with scrawled corrections, evidence of students struggling with math just as today. And just like now, some excelled, some lagged, and some probably tried to sneak peeks at their neighbor's tablet. Quirky tidbit: one exercise problem asked how many bricks were needed to build a wall of certain dimensions. It's the oldest known word problem combining math and construction, a math class that literally built civilization. At night, the sky dazzles above you. Priests point at Mars, glowing red, Jupiter lumbering slow, the Pleiades flickering like clustered jewels. They connect these patterns with myths: gods at war, lovers separated, heroes chasing prey across the heavens. Yet beneath the myths lies real observation. Cycles noted, predictions refined. Historians still argue whether this blending of science and myth slowed or spurred discovery. But it's clear Mesopotamia laid groundwork that still guides us when we glance at clocks or compasses. Joke 3. You realize your wristwatch is basically a Mesopotamian souvenir shop strapped to your arm. As dawn breaks, the priests descend from the ziggurat. The scribes wipe their clay tablets clean, and the city wakes to another day. Numbers and stars have quietly stitched the rhythm of life, binding heaven and earth into order. You drift into a room lit by oil lamps, where clay tablets are stacked like bricks, each line carrying a story instead of an inventory. Here, the scratch of cuneiform is softer, slower, more reverent. Tonight, you're re-listening not to taxes or treaties, but to the Epic of Gilgamesh, the world's eldest surviving tale, quote, pressed into clay 4,000 years ago. Mainstream fact: the Epic of Gilgamesh, originating in Sumer and later expanded in Akkadian, follows King Gilgamesh of Uruk on his journey through friendship, loss, and the search for immortality. Historians still argue whether Gilgamesh was a real historical king, later mythologized, or a purely literary invention embodying human struggles. Quirky tidbit: one tablet of the epic was found in the ruins of Nineveh in the 19th century, broken in pieces. When scholars first translated it, they realized it included a flood story strikingly similar to Noah's Ark. That discovery startled Victorian readers who suddenly saw biblical echoes in clay dug from Iraqi soil. You settle beside an ancient listener as the tale is recited aloud. Gilgamesh, 2/3 divine and 1/3 mortal, begins as a tyrant in Uruk, so oppressive that the gods create a wild man, Enkidu, to humble him. The two clash then embrace as friends, their bond carrying them on quests. They slay monsters like Humbaba, guardian of the cedar forest, and the bull of heaven. But then Enkidu dies, and Gilgamesh tastes grief as raw as any human before or after. His wail echoes across the centuries, a reminder that even kings cannot escape death. Joke 1. The epic might be the first recorded example of a bromance, complete with fights, adventures, and heartbreak. Historians still argue whether the epic was meant as entertainment for audiences, a didactic tale for rulers, or a ritual text for priests. What's clear is its scope. It asks timeless questions about mortality, legacy, and the search for meaning. Quirky note: the tablets even preserve stage directions of sorts pauses for singers, repetitions for rhythm, suggesting these stories weren't just read, but performed like oral poetry before crowds. You follow Gilgamesh as he journeys to the edge of the world, seeking Utnapishtim, the flood survivor gifted immortality by the gods. He learns the secret of a plant that restores youth, only to lose it to a serpent. He returns home wiser but mortal, realizing his city's walls will outlast him. Civilization itself, not eternal life, is the legacy he leaves. Joke 2. Even in 2000 BCE, snakes were stealing humanity's best anti-aging hacks. The language of the epic is heavy with repetition, rhythm, and imagery. Cedar forests glowing like jewels. Waters of death stretching endless. Heroes striding with the weight of destiny. Listening to it, you feel the hush of an audience, long gone farmers, soldiers, merchants, all leaning closer to the firelight as words transported them beyond their hard lives. Quirky tidbit: one tablet ends mid-sentence, broken forever, leaving scholars guessing how that performance concluded. It's the original cliffhanger, except the rest of the episode was lost for millennia. Historians still argue whether the Epic of Gilgamesh influenced later traditions directly, or if similar myths simply grew from shared human concerns. Either way, it's the first echo we hear of a question we're still asking. How do we live knowing we must die? Joke 3. You realize Mesopotamia not only invented writing, but also invented the existential crisis. As the recitation fades, you step outside. Uruk's walls loom, the same walls Gilgamesh admired, still strong while flesh failed. The story lingers in your ears, more enduring than stone, more human than law. In the cradle of civilization, even the first kings learned what we all learn. Immortality lives in memory, not in flesh. You walk northward along dusty caravan trails where the land grows harsher, the rivers narrower, and the tone of history darker. Here, new powers rise, not just city-states, but empires built on iron, roads, and a reputation for fear. This is the realm of Assyria, where kings boast of campaigns and sculpt their victories in stone reliefs that still bristle with cruelty. Mainstream fact: the Assyrian Empire, especially in its Neo-Assyrian phase, 911 to 609 BCE, expanded across Mesopotamia and beyond, creating one of the largest empires of its time. It's known for iron weaponry, siege warfare, and efficient administration. The Assyrians imposed tribute from Egypt to Persia. Historians still argue whether their reliance on terror was a brilliant psychological tactic or a brutal flaw that seeded rebellion. Quirky tidbit: inscriptions from kings like Ashurnasirpal to describe cutting off noses, stacking heads, and parading captives. They recorded these horrors not to shock, but to impress, posting them on palace walls like propaganda. Imagine walking into City Hall and finding the lobby decorated with gory boast postures. You wander the streets of Nineveh, the Assyrian capital, where massive walls tower above, carved gates guarded by colossal Lamassu statues, winged bulls with human faces. The air hums with the weight of empire. Soldiers march in bronze helmets, iron-tipped spears gleaming. Tribute caravans rumble in, piled with gold, timber, and exotic animals from conquered lands. Joke 1. It's less welcome to Nineveh and more welcome to Nineveh. Pay up, or else. Assyria's strength lies not just in force, but in organization. Governors oversee provinces, tax collectors keep meticulous records, and roads allow armies to march swiftly. Messages travel on relay systems, runners carrying tablets from capital to frontier. For a land once fractured by rival city-states, the empire's efficiency is staggering. Historians still argue whether Assyrian innovation like advanced siege engines and iron smelting was homegrown genius or borrowed from neighbors and perfected. Either way, the results were devastating. No city wall was safe. No rival could sleep easy. Quirky note: some Assyrian kings prided themselves on their libraries as much as their armies. Ashurbanipal, the last great king, collected thousands of tablets in Nineveh, preserving myths, laws, and sciences. Iron and terror outside, ink and clay inside, a contradiction that defines the empire. You can almost hear the contrast in the city itself. Markets buzzing with trade goods from across continents, while palace walls echo with the screams of tribute carved into reliefs. Ordinary citizens live between prosperity and fear, never knowing when the next campaign will drag them into the army or strip their harvests. To joke 2. Imagine your government saying, "Good news, we're rich. Bad news, it's because we just conquered your cousin's town." The empire shines brightly, but burns fast. Its cruelty breeds resentment. Subject peoples plot revolts. Babylon, Elam, Medes, and Persians all circle like wolves. By 612 BCE, Nineveh falls. Its once mighty palaces turn to rubble, its fearsome legacy scattered in broken statues. Historians still argue whether Assyria's fall came from overextension, rebellion, or divine retribution, as claimed in later myths. But its influence endures in warfare, in administration, and in the very idea of empire. Quirky tidbit: centuries later, Greek writers still remembered Assyria, not for its governance, but for its sheer brutality. Reputation outlived the state, a warning carved deeper than any relief. Joke 3. You realize Assyria was like the school bully who eventually discovered that even bullies can run out of lunch, money, and friends. As you leave the shattered gates of Nineveh, Lamasso statues broken but still imposing, you feel the weight of an empire that once terrified the world. Mesopotamia, once a cradle, has grown teeth, and the story now carries both glory and dread. You drift southward again, where the Euphrates glitters in sunlight and walls rise higher than you thought possible. This is Babylon, city of legend, where bricks are glazed blue. Processional roads stretch wide, and temples tower over bustling streets. Assyria was remembered for fear. Babylon is remembered for splendor. It's mainstream fact. Babylon became the dominant power of Mesopotamia, especially under King Nebuchadnezzar II, reigned 605 to 562 BCE. Its walls and palaces inspired awe, and ancient writers described it as one of the wonders of the world. Historians still argue whether the famed hanging gardens truly existed here or were later imagined, and perhaps confused with gardens in Nineveh. Quirky tidbit: Herodotus claimed Babylon's walls were so wide that 4 horse-drawn chariots could ride atop them side by side. Modern archaeology suggests exaggeration, but the image stuck a freeway of bricks circling the city. You step through the Ishtar Gate, its surface glazed in deep lapis blue and decorated with striding lions, bulls, and dragons. The colors blaze in sunlight, dazzling after miles of desert dust. Beyond the gate, the processional way unfurls, lined with reliefs and crowds gathering during festivals. Priests lead statues of gods through the streets, while citizens throw flowers and sing hymns. Joke 1. Imagine your city parade, except the floats are 50-foot statues of deities and everyone's dressed in linen robes. Inside the city, the ziggurat called Edamanaki looms a step tower, said to inspire the biblical story of the Tower of Babel. Its bricks seemed to scrape the sky, its shadow cooling the streets below. From its heights, priests watched the stars and declared the will of the gods. Historians still argue whether Babylon's grandeur was mainly political theater and empire, dazzling subjects into awe and genuine devotion to the gods. Likely, it was both, beauty and belief fused in brick and glaze. Quirky note: descriptions of the hanging gardens tell of terrace greenery irrigated by ingenious water-lifting devices. If they existed, they would have required constant maintenance, a feat of engineering as well as aesthetics. Modern scholars debate endlessly, but tourists 2 millennia ago swore they saw leafy terraces floating above the city walls. In the streets, trade flows as easily as gossip. Merchants sell dates, fish, and wool. Artisans craft jewelry of gold and lapis. Scribes copy contracts in shady courtyards. Babylon isn't just a city. It's a stage where wealth and power perform daily. Gok 2. Babylon basically invented bling, gold, gems, glazed bricks, flaunted like the Instagram filters of their day. Yet life here is not all luxury. Ordinary citizens still herd sheep, grind grain, and pray for healthy children. Laws are enforced, taxes collected, soldiers march. Neath the glamour, the rhythm of ancient survival beats steady. Quirky tidbit: clay records show that even priests and nobles ran tabs with tavern keepers, paying in installments of grain or silver. Debt, it seems, is as ancient as beer. The city's fame spreads beyond Mesopotamia. Travelers from Greece, Persia, and beyond carry stories of walls, gates, and gardens, adding flourishes until Babylon becomes less a place and more a legend. Historians still argue whether Babylon deserved its reputation as the greatest city of its time, or whether its splendor was amplified by foreign awe. But as you stand before its towering walls, hearing music drift from festivals, it feels impossible not to be dazzled. Joke 3. You realize Babylon didn't just build walls, it built hype, and it's been trending for 2,500 years. As night falls, the blue glazed gate glows in torchlight, lions seeming to prowl along its surface. Babylon is alive with music, trade, and prayers, its towers reflecting both ambition and faith. For a moment, the city feels eternal, though history will remind us nothing ever is. You linger in Babylon a little longer, where kings stride through palace courtyards, heavy with incense and ambition. Chief among them is Nebuchadnezzar II, remembered both for monumental building projects and for shifting entire peoples at will. His reign is stamped into the very bricks of the city, each one inscribed with his name, as if to say, "I was here, and I will be remembered." Mainstream fact: Nebuchadnezzar II ruled Babylon from 605 to 562 BCE, spanning its empire and capturing Jerusalem in 587 BCE. His campaigns led to the Babylonian exile of the Jewish people, a pivotal moment in biblical history. Historians still argue whether his reputation as a ruthless conqueror overshadows his role as an ambitious builder and patron of culture. Quirky tidbit: Nebuchadnezzar had such an obsession with construction that archaeologists joke you can't dig in Babylon without finding bricks stamped with his royal seal. It's like the ancient version of writing your name on every school book. You walk through his palace, hearing echoes of commands and chisels striking stone. Servants hustle, diplomats wait, nervously scribes trail the king, recording his words. Outside, columns rise, courtyards bloom, and canals shimmer with water redirected to feed both crops and ornamental gardens. Joke 1. Nebuchadnezzar wasn't he just a king? He was basically Mesopotamia's overachieving real estate developer. Yet his reign wasn't all glory. The exile of conquered peoples, especially the Jews from Jerusalem, left deep cultural scars. Songs of lament echoed along foreign rivers, memories of a lost homeland carried for generations. For Nebuchadnezzar, deportation with strategy move populations, weaken rebellion, increase control. For those uprooted, it was trauma etched into faith and history. Historians still argue whether exile was primarily political pragmatism or a policy of cruelty. As some point out, it also spread ideas and culture, intertwining destinies of different peoples in ways no one expected. Quirky note: clay ration tablets found in Babylon mention provisions given to Yakin, king of Judah, thought to be the captive Jehoiachin. Even kings reduced to 2 footnotes in another ruler's archive. Back in the city, Nebuchadnezzar's works dazzle. The Ishtar Gate, the processional way, the ziggurat, Etemenaki, they all swell under his hand. He layers beauty over brutality, faith over fear. Citizens marvel, foreigners tremble, scribes etch his name endlessly. Joke 2. If hashtags had existed, Nebuchadnezzar would have been trending daily hashtag Newgate hashtag bigger ziggurat hashtag exile problems. The king's ambitions reached legendary proportions. Stories of the Hanging Gardens are often tied to him, with later writers claiming he built them for a homesick queen longing for mountains. Whether real or myth, the tale reflects his reputation. No project too grand, no desire too impossible, but shadows lengthen. Empires rise and fall quickly in Mesopotamia, and Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon won't last forever. His successors falter, rival powers gather, and within decades, the Persians will sweep in. The grandeur you see now is fleeting, like torchlight flickering against glazed brick. Quirky tidbit: later Jewish and Christian traditions remembered Nebuchadnezzar as a tyrant who challenged God himself, contrasting sharply with Babylonian records that hail him as a bringer of prosperity. Same king, 2 legacies depends which library you open. Joke 3. It's proof that PR spin is as old as empires or enemies call you a monster. Your people call you a hero, and archaeologists just find your name stamped on way too many bricks. As you leave his palace, the night air smells of bitumen and baked clay. Babylon glitters, but you feel the tremor of change. Nebuchadnezzar's mark is everywhere, yet you know that even bricks stamped with his name cannot hold back the tide of history. You drift into a quieter dawn when banners of a new empire rise above Babylon's gates. The Persians have arrived, and with them comes a shift from city-states and short-lived dynasties to a vast dominion that stretches from the Indus Valley to the Mediterranean. The rhythm of Mesopotamia changes again, this time woven into a larger fabric. Mainstream fact: Cyrus the Great conquered Babylon in 539 BCE, incorporating Mesopotamia into the Achaemenid Persian Empire. Unlike earlier conquerors, he allowed exiled peoples, including the Jews, to return to their homelands, a policy recorded on the famous Cyrus Cylinder. Historians still argue whether this was true benevolence or simply a clever political strategy to stabilize his empire. Quirky tidbit: when Cyrus entered Babylon, Quark suggests the city surrendered peacefully, with priests even welcoming him as chosen by Marduk, Babylon's chief god. Imagine a hostile takeover framed as a divine promotion. You walk through Babylon streets under new banners. The Persians don't tear down the ziggurats or gates. They fold them into their imperial network. Local governors, called satraps, manage provinces, while the royal road system links cities across thousands of miles. The old heart of Mesopotamia becomes one organ in a much larger body. Joke 1. Babylon basically went from being the center of the world to just one important stop on the Persian highway system. The Persians bring different languages, coins, and customs, but they also preserve what came before. Temples still function, scribes still press cuneiform into clay, and merchants still crowd the markets. Yet slowly, Aramaic replaces Sumerian and Akkadian as the common tongue, smoothing communication across the empire. Historians still argue whether Persian rule was kinder than Assyrian or Babylonian dominance. Some see Cyrus as enlightened, citing his tolerance. Others note the empire's heavy taxes and strict control. To ordinary farmers, empire likely felt much the same. Fields to plow, rulers far away, and tributes demanded regardless of who sat on the throne. It's a quirky note. The famous Cyrus Cylinder, often called the first human rights charter, is really more like a press release in Clay Cyrus, boasting of his fairness while securing loyalty. Even then, rulers understood the power of branding. You passed Persian officials counting taxes, scribes writing in both cuneiform and Aramaic, and traders carrying goods stamped with seals recognizable from Egypt to India. Mesopotamia is no longer isolated, ancient style. Joke 2. Think of it as the first corporate merger. Babylon Inc. gets absorbed into Persia Unlimited. And yet, even under Persian banners, the memory of Mesopotamia's past lingers. Priests still tell tales of Gilgamesh. Families still pour libations to Inanna and Marduk, and the Euphrates still floods its fields. The cradle of civilization keeps rocking, even as new empires pick it up and carry it further. Quirky tidbit: some Mesopotamian temples remained active well into Persian times, their rituals continuing centuries after their myths had first been pressed into clay. Continuity clung stubbornly to the soil, even as rulers changed. Historians still argue whether Persia preserved or diluted Mesopotamian culture. What's clear is that Mesopotamia entered history's bloodstream, hieroglyphs, writing, laws, and myths flowing outward, carried by Persian roads into lands far beyond the river's reach. Joke 3. You realize Mesopotamia's legacy didn't end, just got franchised. Dusk falls over Babylon under Persian rule. The gates still glow. The ziggurats still casts a shadow, but the story now stretches wider. Mesopotamia is no longer just itself, it's part of something bigger. A chapter folded into an empire that will pass its inheritance on again and again. You wander into a quieter age, when armies no longer thunder through the gates every decade. But scribes still bend over clay, and libraries swell with the weight of memory. Mesopotamia's empires may crumble, but its knowledge refuses to die. Kings fade, yet tablets endure. Mainstream fact: one of the greatest collections of Mesopotamian literature was assembled by King Ashurbanipal of Assyria in the 7th century BCE at Nineveh. Thousands of tablets were preserved, including myths, medical texts, astronomical records, and the Epic of Gilgamesh. Historians still argue whether Ashurbanipal truly read these works as he boasted, or if his literacy claims were royal propaganda. Quirky tidbit: when Nineveh burned in 612 BCE, the clay tablets in his libraries hardened in the flames. The fire that destroyed the city accidentally baked the texts into permanent artifacts history, saved by catastrophe. You walk through a dim library chamber, shelves sagging under stacks of tablets. Some are contracts, some are recipes, some are omens scratched in hasty hands. Others are masterworks, epics, and hymns, copied and recopied for centuries. Students sit cross-legged, repeating lines aloud, learning not just language, but identity. Joke 1. If you thought your school backpack was heavy, imagine hauling a semester's worth of clay tablets. These libraries serve as time capsules. They preserve flood myths that echo into Hebrew scripture, astronomical charts that inspire Greek scholars, and medical incantations later mirrored in medieval practices. Mesopotamia's ideas don't vanish, they ripple outward, disguised in other tongues. Historians still argue whether these texts were widely read or confined to a narrow, literate elite. Most citizens never touched a tablet, but their lives were shaped by the laws, rituals, and calendars recorded within. Literacy, concentrated in a few hands, didn't lessen its influence, it amplified it. Quirky note: some tablets contain lists of synonyms and translations between Sumerian, Akkadian, and other tongues, essentially the world's first dictionaries. Scribes, learning their craft, struggled through vocab lists, just like modern students cramming verb charts. You trace your hand across a cracked tablet. The wedge marks still feel sharp after 2,500 years. Someone's stylus pressed here in a world of dust and flood, and their thoughts leap into your present. Writing collapses time. Joke 2. You realize Mesopotamian libraries were basically the first cloud storage, except the cloud was a pile of very heavy dirt, and yet much was lost. Entire stories crumble into fragments, single lines preserved without context. Scholars today puzzle over half-legible tablets, filling gaps with guesswork. Knowledge survives, but incompletely, like a dream half-remembered at dawn. Quirky tidbit: among the texts are math problems, riddles, even jokes. One tablet preserves a riddle so obscure that modern translators still debate the punchline. It's proof that ancient humor doesn't always age well. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamian knowledge flowed directly into Greece and beyond, or if later civilizations reinvented similar ideas independently. Either way, echoes remain unmistakable. Bay 60, math in our clocks, flood stories in our myths, constellations in our skies. Joke 3. You realize the Mesopotamians didn't just invent civilization, they also invented homework that haunts us to this day. As the library doors close behind you, the silence feels deep, but not empty. The words pressed into clay hum softly in the dark, waiting for someone, centuries later, to listen again. You walk once more between the rivers, where reeds whisper in the breeze and the soil still smells rich with silt. Mesopotamia's empires have risen and fallen: Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, Assyria, Persia, but the echoes never left. Even now, pieces of its story are stitched into the fabric of our daily lives. Mainstream fact: Mesopotamia gave us writing, codified law, irrigation systems, and mathematical frameworks that still shape modern life. Our 24-hour day and 60-minute hour trace back to their Bake 60 mathematics. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamia deserves the title cradle of civilization alone, or whether Egypt, the Indus Valley, and China shared the claim equally. Quirky tidbit: the oldest known recipe in the world, written on a Mesopotamian tablet, is for beer. So when you sip a cold one after work, you're basically reenacting a 4,000-year-old tradition. You look around and realize that their inventions weren't just tools, but ideas, ways of thinking that still rippled through time. The rule of law as a foundation for order, writing as memory outside the human body. Cities as hubs where commerce, religion, and politics converge. The very structure of daily life calendars, contracts, taxes was first shaped here. Joke 1. Next time you're frustrated about paying your bills, you can thank Mesopotamia. They invented the due date. Their myths seeped into later traditions too. The story of a great flood, a serpent stealing immortality, a hero wandering the earth in search of meaning. These motifs stretch far beyond the Tigris and Euphrates. Gilgamesh's voice still lingers in echoes of scripture, literature, and even modern novels. Historians still argue whether we should view Mesopotamia primarily as brilliant innovators or as flawed humans stumbling through trial and error. Probably both. They built beauty, but also inequality. They created writing, but also endless bureaucracy. Their story is our story in miniature: ambition, error, resilience. Quirky note: clay tablets, once dismissed as rubble, now sit in museum cases under spotlights, admired like jewels. The ancients never imagined their receipts and laws would become priceless relics. You breathe in the imagined air of those ancient plains. You feel how close they remain. Every clock tick, every city skyline, every page you read owes something to the people who first scratched symbols into clay, who first stacked mud bricks into walls, who first looked at rivers and saw not just water, but civilization. Joke 2. Mesopotamia may be long gone, but your calendar app is basically running on its operating system. The rivers still run. though empires have washed away. And as you drift toward sleep, their legacy hums gently. Stories pressed into clay, laws carved in stone, numbers carved into time. Humanity's first experiment in living together, messy and magnificent, still lingers in the world we inhabit every day. Joke 3. You realize that in the end, Mesopotamia gave us two things we can't escape: homework and deadlines. The pace softens down, like the rivers at dusk, when the Tigris and Euphrates lose their roar and flow in gentle murmurs. The story of Mesopotamia, long and tangled, begins to fade into something simpler: rhythm of water, fields, and voices carried faintly on the wind. You picture the ziggurats melting into silhouettes under a red sun, their bricks warm, their stairs quiet. The markets close, merchants roll up their mats, scribes set down their styluses. Lamps flicker in doorways, children curl up on reed mats, and the city hum turns into a low, steady breath. Civilization rests, the same way it began, fragile but enduring. The noise of wars and dynasties slips away now. What lingers instead is the quiet gift Mesopotamia left: time divided into hours, stories pressed into clay, laws to bind chaos into order. These are not loud things. They are gentle frameworks, background hums that guide us still. As night deepens, you step into the hush of the plain. The reeds sway, the stars emerge, and the rivers murmur as they have for thousands of years. Their waters have seen empires come and go, but still they flow, patient and unhurried. Breathe with that rhythm, slow, steady, like the rivers themselves. Let the voices of scribes, priests, and farmers blur into a soft chorus, distant and calm. The world may change, but the cadence of water, the turning of stars, the quiet search for meaning remain. Close your eyes. The rivers cradle you now. Tomorrow belongs to noise, but tonight you can rest in the silence of ancient fields, where civilization first whispered itself into being.